It was sort of an invitation to come to the desert. There were four artists that in 2015 met in the Nevada desert outside of Death Valley National Park in a place called Rhyolite. And there was a residency called Goldwell Open Air Museum, and it's sort of a in the middle of nowhere place. There's a big red barn, and artists can go work in the barn as a studio space. So we met there with really no intentions, just four artists meeting in the desert. And I took along with me a book called Desert Notes by Barry Lopez. And that was sort of my starting point, was just reading this book in the desert, a different desert than where he was, but a desert. And as I was reading, I found all of these lines about sort of just being, just sitting on the desert floor, collecting things, putting rocks back together to form stones, just sort of these sublime phrases and paragraphs. And so that was sort of my starting point. And I did some of those things. I would just sit and sort of look at what was around me. These video and photographs are of the ground. So I was very close. You see in the video, I'm on the ground. I'm just very close to the ground. And that was just sort of where I stayed the whole time. I didn't really look out into the horizon. I just sort of stayed right there. And a lot of these works are with my hands in rocks, you see in the video. I sort of became interested in the shapes, and if you move stones, the impressions that the stones have left in the ground. I started to see pink everywhere. Well, the rhyolite stone actually has some pink in it, but depending on the light, depending on the season, if the ground in the winter has a little more moisture, there's more pink. In the summer, it's a different color. In the spring, there might be little bits of green, which I sort of highlighted in these. So this rhyolite stone that does have pink, I noticed, and then I just sort of started adding more pink to the desert floor. I don't know if there was something specific about the desert landscape that struck me, or if it's just a way of looking at landscape. Maybe that's what I was trying to say before. But I think there's a way of looking closely at landscape, and that's what I do with most of my work. I think it's about looking closely. The way of looking closely has just been a method of mine of being in landscape versus looking at landscape, being in landscape and looking closely. So when I was reading Desert Notes, I think that struck me, the similarity of what he was doing, or what he was telling the reader to do, or what the stories were suggesting to the reader. I think that's why I latched on to that so much, and it was easier for me to say, okay, I can take this sentence and do this action. Right, so all of the shapes that I was working with were all where larger stones were, that I removed those. So yeah, there were impressions in the desert floor that I took a photo of or video, and so that's where those shapes came from. So after I had the photographs, some of them I printed as photographs, some of them I printed as digital negatives and made cyanotypes, and then painted with gouache and watercolor pencil on the shapes left by the impressions of the stones. So I don't know if that's important, but that's how it happened, and that's where the shapes came from. And I also, they remind me of when you are in the sun and you are looking down or you are looking up, and those sunspots that sort of happen around you. So, some of the halos, the pink halos, and some of these became more like sunspots than stone. These were made here after I came back. But I did have paper on the desert floor. I did a lot of rubbings also with graphite on the rock. But these came after. So drawing on the rock, and then this became drawing with the rock. I think a lot about repetition, but I don't necessarily think about composition or color, or I don't even know that I think of a finished work when I start something like this. These were made just, again, it was more of an action, a repetitive action of taking a rock and making a circle. And that's what these were about, was about the paper and the rock, and the idea of drawing, thinking of drawing as a starting point, but not necessarily the formal definition or tradition of drawing. So the rock drawing itself on the paper. So these are from a cactus. It's a barrel cactus called the Mojave redhead, and I don't know if that's how widespread that name is, but it's like I said, a barrel cactus. When it's living, the spike, it looks like a cactus with spikes that are a light pink, and it's really pretty, and I'm sure it blooms. I didn't see it blooming, but I only saw it dead, so I didn't even know what it looked like living. But when the barrels, I guess they die off separately, but when the barrels die off, the spikes turn this gray, and they're very brittle. And I just came upon one of them, and I just started pulling the spikes off. And they are sort of, they almost look like little aliens, little spiders. I tried to do some video animation with them, and it didn't quite work out, but I wanted to somehow include them because they're so weird and so beautiful, and I decided to paint them pink for this show. They are from the same landscape. I don't know if it's because I sort of hand-picked them out of their environment. Like I said, they're just so wild and interesting that I wanted to include them.